The spiritual leader and inspirational speaker, Iyanla Vanzant, hosts a reality show on the Oprah Winfrey Network called Iyanla, Fix My Life. And the premise of the show is that people who are going through some difficulties in their lives and who want to live better lives invite Iyanla to come into their homes to help them confront, address, and solve their problems. Now, if you haven't seen the show, it's quite a show. And I sometimes feel bad. I've only watched about 2 or 3 episodes, but I feel bad about watching it because you really do see pain. People confronting real pain and a real desire to fix their lives. But in the 2 or 3 episodes of the show that I have seen, I have discerned from it and from what people told me about the rest of the episodes that just about every one of the problems is boiled down to a broken relationship. The people who call on Iyanla to fix their lives cannot live whole and healthy lives because there has been some kind of breach in a relationship with a spouse, a lover, a friend, or a family member. And what you discover as Iyanla is offering advice and strategies and support is that the broken relationship is actually a symptom of something else. Usually, the broken relationship is a symptom of a deeper set of negative and destructive feelings. That is, the people have been walking around with anger and wrath and lust and greed and cruelty and intolerance and lack of compassion. And at this moment of broken relationship, it is because they could not address those other feelings ahead of time. And if you think about it for a moment, and even if we look at some of the difficulties in our own lives, we can probably all point to our own experiences of broken relationships. And sometimes we fail to even examine the reasons we got to where we were. The feelings, the emotions, the things that we didn't check. So it should come as no surprise to us that the people to whom Jesus is speaking in his Sermon on the Mount, those disciples and followers who come to him to learn how to live a whole life as part of the reign of God, are people who also know the pain and destruction of broken relationship. Brokenness is all around them. And in our text today, Jesus expounds on his assertion, and we've heard this assertion last week and we're hearing it today, that I did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. And more than that, as Jesus tells his followers how they should understand the commandments and his interpretation of them, he calls them to exhibit a greater righteousness than those who are sticklers for the letter of the law. And as you might imagine, a people of faith who have tended to the rules and requirements of the faith, who have wanted to know exactly what it means for Jesus to say that he is the fulfillment of the commandments, and want to know exactly what it means to have a greater righteousness without being a stickler for the letter of the law. Jesus' words may seem like a reinforcement of the way church always has been. However, like the good teacher Jesus is, Jesus gives them examples to reveal exactly what he means. Everybody in that crowd knows that they are prohibited from committing murder. That is a given. Everybody in that crowd knows that they are prohibited from committing adultery. But murder and adultery are symptoms of a deeper set of negative attitudes and destructive feelings. So what is murder but an intensification of hate and wrath? What is adultery but an intensification of lust and covetousness? So Jesus says it is not good enough to refrain from murdering your neighbor. You have to address the reasons why you want to. Oh, you are so quiet. In a word, check your anger. Check your desire for vengeance. Because if you don't check it, you might get to a place where you want to kill your brother. I'm thinking Cain here. So Jesus calls them to intensify something other than your hate. It's not good enough to refrain from having sex with somebody who's in a relationship with somebody else. You have to rid yourself of the things that would make you want to violate the relationship bond of someone else. So Jesus says, check your lust and check your desire to take somebody that doesn't belong to you. I'm going to get in trouble up in here. But so when Jesus says, I did not come to abolish the law, he was saying, I'm coming to intensify and radicalize. Oh, don't get afraid with don't be afraid what that means now. Jesus radicalizes and intensifies the commandments of good things, of the good of life, of good and faithful living. What do you mean by that, Pastor? Let me go this way. So Jesus says, and now he's about to really get into people's business, and I know they don't like it. Unfortunately, the Gospels don't tell us people complaining because I know they complain. How do I know? Because we complain. We don't want Jesus to tell us what to do all that much, but so we do it anyway. But anyway, here we go. Jesus goes to the heart of the matter and said, oh, I know what you're doing. You got all these people who are showing up in worship, good church folk who know all the prayers and the songs, sing louder than anybody else. They contribute their time, talent, and treasure to the community of faith, but they live in discord and conflict with their neighbors. Oh, you were quiet here. Let me put it the way Jesus would say it. I give you a new standard. Here's the fulfillment. You can't be in right relationship with God if you are not in right relationship with your neighbor. Oh, wow. I know I'm going to make you mad today, but let's go. You can't be in right relationship with God if you are filled with anger and wrath and vengeance at your sibling. You can't be in right relationship with God if you are slandering and defaming your neighbor. Be reconciled to each other and put away anything that separates you from God and your neighbor. So trust me, I don't think Jesus wants us running around here gouging our eyes out and cutting off our hands. But Jesus is radicalizing, intensifying the things of God. We know how to radicalize anger. We know how to intensify our hate of someone who's done us wrong. We are very good at intensifying our vengeance. Oh, I've said on many a night, I'll stay up all night trying to figure out a way to get back at you. We know how to intensify the wrong things. But what God wants, what Jesus wants his people to see is that the realm of God is not like the realm of this world. It is not enough simply to learn the rules and requirements of religious life without understanding the values and principles those rules and requirements are lifting up. What are these rules for? What are these values that we're trying to hold on to? These are the very values that reflect God's character. What is God's character? Love, grace, mercy, fidelity, forgiveness, and reconciliation. This is who God has been all the time. Love, grace, mercy, fidelity, forgiveness, reconciliation. This is all that God has shown you, Israel. This is all that God has shown God's people. Love, grace, mercy, fidelity, forgiveness and reconciliation. So Jesus wants his disciples and followers to know that a whole life in the realm of God is about right relationship with God and neighbor. A whole life in God is about not letting any part of our lives separate us from God and each other. This is a call to radicalize and intensify the things that God has shown us. Radicalize and intensify love. Radicalize and intensify grace. Radicalize and intensify mercy. Radicalize and intensify fidelity. Radicalize and intensify forgiveness. Radicalize and intensify reconciliation. If we do that, the world will look at us like we are crazy, and that's what we want. That's what we want. It's about removing that anger, that wrath, that lust, that greed, that cruelty, that intolerance, that lack of compassion that is breaking down relationships. Oh, I've seen it. I've seen it. Many of us have wondered why our relationships get broken. And sometimes we carry so much pain and so much hurt that we wonder how we can live a whole life, not just our own life, but a life with God. And unfortunately, some of the churches we used to attend told us that, oh, you are going to have nothing but broken relationships because of who you are and because of who you love. But the truth is, our identities are not. But the call of faith is to not let these things stop us from loving one another. To have a greater righteousness that pushes us to intensify the things that will bring us together. Oh, unfortunately, our politics now is all about the things that will radicalize and intensify the things that separate us. Radicalize and intensify the things that pull us apart from one another. Every day is a new story about how the new administration is fomenting a breach because they are intensifying the things that pull us away from each other. And there is nothing more disheartening than discovering how many broken relationships are there in the church. And how hard it appears for people of faith to be reconciled. Yes, I'm about to get in trouble. Many of us have known the pain of being murdered by gossip and insults inside the very church. And we have witnessed and experienced the violation of the bonds of relationships and marriages that grieve our souls. Oh, yes, and the saddest part of it is how we just continue to find it so hard to be in right relationship. Oh, that's our humanness. Too many people of faith are satisfied that as long as I pray, worship, and pay my tithes and study the scriptures, I can hate you all day long. As long as I read the Bible and know it through and through, I cannot like you all I like. And then we adjust ourselves to the anger and to the lust and the greed and the cruelty and the lack of compassion, as long as I didn't murder you. Now, I'm not telling anyone in here to return to abusive relationships. I'm not asking anybody to forgive someone prematurely. I'm not telling anybody to subject themselves to soul-crushing theology and hellfire preaching. I'm not telling anybody to accept insults and put downs because you are worth more than that. But I do want us to take seriously Jesus' exhortation to be reconciled with our siblings as part of our discipleship, as part of our spiritual discipline. I do want us to accept Jesus' call to a greater righteousness that reflects who God is. What would our community look like if we took seriously the call to a greater righteousness? What would it look like if we intensified love and forgiveness beyond all else? What would it look like for us to do that? To reach out to each other beyond our differences, beyond the breach, and say that you are my sister, you are my brother, you are my sibling, I love you. To be in right relationship with God by knowing that I can't be if I'm not in right relationship with you. a greater righteousness. No, I'm not talking about an attitude of spiritual superiority or being holier than thou. I'm talking about putting away our concerns for creeds and doctrines and dogma and instead radicalizing love. I'm talking about being truly inclusive such that people will see our love rather than our theology and not even care what our theology is. I'm talking about people responding to our grace rather than wondering about our rules and requirements. I'm talking about people who embrace us in relationship rather than stand at a distance in mistrust, pulling together, reconciled to one another. Oh, I know it's the hardest thing in the world. I know. It is not easy for me to go back home to a family with a theology that rejects me for the very person that I am. But I don't hate the people who reject me. It doesn't mean I'm superior. It doesn't mean I'm holier. It just means that I'm trying. I'm trying. And so, in that sermon on the Mount, when Jesus spoke so vibrantly and vividly about cutting your eye out and cutting your hand, was intensifying and radicalizing the very things of God. That anything that separates you from God and from your neighbor, put it away. Get rid of it. And radicalize the very thing that draws us into the bosom of God. Love, grace, mercy, fidelity, forgiveness, and reconciliation. That will lead us to live a whole